Welcome to the Militia Gaming Community. I'm Trigger, and this video is all about the pro settings for ground vehicles in the Crew 2. Let's go! Pro settings are extremely important in the Crew 2. The stock settings are not great for racing, and each vehicle will need its own settings to allow you to get the best out of that vehicle. Not only do you need to adjust pro settings to maximize the vehicle's ability, but you also need to do it to maximize your ability to drive the vehicle. There is no one that can tell you the perfect pro settings for you, even though we YouTubers will try with every build video. That being said, this video is all about teaching you the effects of each of the settings for vehicles driven on the ground so that you have the ability to adjust them to your liking without making the car undrivable. Alright, first let's talk about the global settings. These settings affect every car in that discipline. If you change it for one car, it will change for all the cars in that discipline. An example of a discipline would be street race or hypercars. All street race cars share the same global settings, and all hypercars share the same global settings for hypercars. If you're looking for a specific description of a setting, you can check the description of this video for timestamps to go directly to that setting in the video. So let's get into it. Traction control limits the effect of the throttle to prevent grip loss in all circumstances. If the car senses the wheels are losing grip, it will automatically limit your throttle. Generally, it's good to have this maxed out in this game, but there are some disciplines where you will want to have it completely off, like drifting, for example. Just know, the farther to the right you put this slider, the more the car will limit traction loss. ABS is also known as the anti-lock braking system. It does exactly that. It prevents the brakes from locking up and sliding. Generally, it's a good thing to have this maxed out. Adjusting the slider to the right will decrease the braking power in order to prevent locking up the wheels. Adjusting it to the left will increase the braking power, which can cause lockups. ESP, also known as Electronic Stability Programs, is a program in the car's computer that is designed to prevent the wheels from losing traction, thus making the car more stable. It does this by limiting the power the car sends to the wheels. This setting is particularly noticeable when turning. Sliding it to the right will limit your car's power and make it more stable, and sliding it to the left will allow the car's full power to be applied to the wheels. And the last global setting for ground vehicles is Drift Assist. This setting helps you maintain control of the car when drifting. It prevents severe oversteer and drifting too far to one side, causing the car to spin. It's an automatic countersteer. It also affects how fast you can swing the car from side to side. If you adjust this setting to the left, you will have faster drift transitions, but it will be harder to maintain those slides. Slide it to the right, and you will notice longer drifts, but less ability to transition the car. Now, moving on to the specific settings. These settings are specific to the car that you are driving. You will need to adjust these to your liking every single time you buy a new car. Aero Distribution is the downforce balance. To the right increases the downforce for the front of the car. To the left increases the downforce for the rear of the car. This is quite possibly the most important setting to get right. It has a dramatic effect on the car's handling, traction, and steering sensitivity. The more downforce you have on the front of the car, the more it will oversteer and have sensitive steering. However, you are more likely to lose traction in turns if you do that. The more downforce you have on the rear, the more the car will understeer and be less sensitive, but you won't lose traction in the turns either. Finding the balance for each car is key, and it will be completely your preference, so adjust this where you need to, one notch at a time. Differential distribution is for all-wheel drive cars with adjustable differentials. This slider shifts the power from the front to the back or vice versa. Sliding it to the left will put most of the power to the rear wheels, causing more oversteer. Sliding it to the right will shift the power to the front wheels, causing more understeer. The gearbox is a simplistic adjustment of how short or long your gears are. This affects acceleration and top speed. To the left will reduce your top speed, making your gears shorter and increase your acceleration. Sliding it to the right will increase your top speed, making your gears longer and reduce your acceleration. Tire grip front is exactly that. It's how grippy do you want your front tires. The more you move the slider to the left, the more it will reduce grip and cause an understeer, where moving it to the right will increase the grip and cause oversteer. Tire grip rear is exactly the same, but for the rear tires. Sliding this setting to the left will decrease the grip of the rear tires, causing oversteer, and moving it to the right will increase rear grip, causing understeer. Brake power is pretty simple. Moving this slider to the left will allow less braking power and cause a longer brake distance, and moving the slider to the right will allow more braking power and reduce the braking distance. Brake balance, on the other hand, will change where the brakes are the strongest. If you have this setting in the middle, the car will have the same braking power for the front and the back wheels. This is not always recommended because generally you need more braking power in the places where the car is heavier. For example, a front engine car has a lot more weight in the front of the car and needs stronger braking in the front to keep the car balanced in turns. If the car is unbalanced, it will either oversteer or understeer while braking in the turns. Moving this slider to the left will cause understeer during braking, and moving it to the right will cause oversteer during braking. Suspension comp front is the compression or upward movement of the suspension. Basically, it's how stiff the suspension is in the front of the car. Moving this to the left will soften the suspension and cause more oversteer. Moving it to the right will stiffen the suspension, which causes more understeer. Suspension Reb Front is the rebound or downward movement of the suspension after it has been compressed. Moving this slider to the left will make the suspension rebound slower, which causes oversteer. Moving it to the right will make the suspension rebound faster, causing understeer. Suspension comp rear is the same as the suspension comp front, but for the rear wheels. Making the rear stiffer by moving the slider to the right will cause oversteer, and making it softer by sliding it to the left will cause understeer. Suspension Reb Rear is again the same as the front, but for the rear wheel. Adjusting it to the left will make the rebound slower and cause understeer. Adjusting it to the right will make the rebound faster and cause oversteer. Suspension geometry camber front adjusts the tilt or the vertical alignment of the front wheels. The farther right you go with this slider, the less traction your front wheels will have and the more the car will understeer. If you put this slider all the way to the left, your wheels will be exactly 90 degrees straight up and down with no tilt or camber. Suspension geometry camber rear is the same but for the rear wheels. The farther you put this slider to the right, the less traction you will have in the rear, which causes oversteer. Again, if you put this slider all the way to the left, the rear wheels will have no camber or tilt at all. Lastly, the ARB or anti-roll bars. These add a level of stiffness to the body of the car in the front or the rear. The main effect of this setting is how well the car absorbs bumps or curbs and how much body roll the car will have. For example, if you increase this setting in the front by sliding it to the right, the front of the car will be very stiff and will not absorb bumps well, which could lead to you being out of control while taking shortcuts, jumps, going over curbs, and being in the dirt. This is more noticeable at higher speeds. But if this setting is too far to the left, the car is way too squishy and the body of the car will lean more in turns, which can cause either an oversteer or an understeer. When adjusting this setting, you really need to think about the type of racing that you are doing. If you're racing Alpha GP, generally the tracks are very smooth and flat. You do not need to have a soft anti-roll bar. In fact, you want the body of that car to be completely stiff. But if you're racing on the street and you're taking shortcuts left and right, you may not want the car to be bouncing off of the curbs and lifting up every time that you hit a small bump. So adjust this setting depending on how this car is reacting in the field. Now I know for a fact you guys aren't going to remember the effects of each of these settings, so I've hunted down a chart for you and put it into my own spreadsheet with all of my pro settings for the cars that I've tested and set up. There's a link to this sheet in the description. Hopefully you find this helpful. At this time, not all of the cars in the Crew 2 are on this spreadsheet, but I'm not done updating it. Each week I'm adding new cars, and usually I go by which vehicles I need for that week's summit. I'd like to give a huge shout out to Reddit user Chris Fly for putting this table together. I know that he referenced other members of the community as well, and I will link his Reddit post in the description so you can check it out. Alright, as always, if you have any questions about this video or any video, you're welcome to send me a DM on Instagram or Twitter. Just be patient for a response. Shout out to all the Militia subs. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one. Trigger out.